a portrait of many things, but also a deep and abiding love for the people of Jammu and Kashmir, many of whom have served alongside you. And in particular, one of the very moving portraits in your book is of a man who, as you say, starts his life as a terrorist, then becomes what is known as an Ikhwan, which was surrendered militants, and then eventually becomes a decorated, valorized soldier of the army who basically gives his life for India. Tell us Nazir's story.
Before telling you Nazir's story, I want to point out a coincidence on which these narratives are based.
Okay.
I was commissioned in December 79. And my first posting was in Srinagar in January 80. Few months after I reported to Jammu and Kashmir Light Infantry Center, that is Jackal my regiment center. Those days it was very close to Lal Chowk in Hafchinar.
Yeah.
Few months after that, Nazir Wani was born in Kulgam.
Really?
And I retired on 31st of October 2018. 24 days after that, he made the supreme sacrifice. Nazir Wani made the supreme sacrifice.
So destiny had some connection between you and him.
Yes, and he was awarded Ashok Chakra posthumously for that operation, having already earned 2 Sena medals in different operations. So all I'm trying to point out is my entire service, which is in Jammu and Kashmir Light Infantry Regiment, and his entire life ran concurrently. And that is how these two narratives crisscross.
Now, many people, before we come to Nazir, many people don't know what is an Ikhwan.
Yes.
Or they think Ikhwan, they think Kuka Pare. Yeah. They at most know one name. He was certainly the best known face of the Ikhwans. The Ikhwans now have been integrated, as you write, into the territorial army, into regular regiments. But there was a time when they were almost like a separate force.
Yes.
And they were all surrendered terrorists, surrendered militants, but they were allowed to keep their arms. And they were a very, if you went to South Kashmir, you could meet Ikhwans, they would be on the streets, they would be holding these guns. They were very difficult times in Jammu and Kashmir. And they became a very hotly debated. People criticized them also. You also say sometimes there was excess, they misused the fact that they were armed. How do you look at that experiment with Ikhwans? The critics called it a private militia.
Yes.
The Faujis and the security forces have always said that they were an instrument in the fight against terrorism.
Yes. So, you see, I have taken Nazir's as my protagonist.
To explain
not only Ikhwan, to explain how what was our state response? When I say state, means national, state and military put together. What was our response to terrorism that started in this flagrant way in 1988-89, how we raised Rashtriya Rifles, how we raised Ikhwan, then Territorial Army Battalion, how we increased Rashtriya Rifles, etc. So coming to your question now about Ikhwan. Ikhwan is an element of the surrendered militants, surrendered terrorists. And this is not something that unprecedented. It has happened across the world. There are those Contra rebels in South America. There are many other places. What we did in 1993, initially it started off by an organization called JKSLF. It was Jammu and Kashmir Students Liberation Front. And by word student, you can understand that they were slightly more educated lot. They got disillusioned by Pakistan's modus operandi very soon, and they realized, they were a little educated lot, and they realized that Pakistan is using them for their own ends. So many of them wanted to surrender, wanted to come over. And I think we must give credit to those who were involved in a big measure, that is whether it was army, intelligence agencies, JK police, all put together, and many maybe more, all government itself took a very bold step of integrating them or getting them overboard. They formed something called Ikhwan. Ikhwan, the word Ikhwan means brotherhood. So these Ikhwan, like you brought out, they knew everything about terrorists. They were terrorists themselves, but they have come overboard. So they could generate real-time intelligence, actionable intelligence. That means it was not an information of what happened 2 days ago in Rajwar forest. They would tell them what is going to happen tomorrow evening. Not only that, when I have operated at different ranks and levels. When you actually reach a place, it's such a large area. Even if you know a location of terrorist hideout or meeting, a very large area, by the time you start combing it, you really, they either they melt away, or you lose them, or you lose half of them. They actually led the operation. I mean, they acted as guides during the operation. So they led our soldiers, they led the policemen to the hideout. So they actually participated in the operations that way. So they were so effective that I think we can credit the 1996 elections in a large measure to the Ikhwan's help in this thing. And Mr. Dullat writes in his book, I mean, 1996 election, as you all know, you've been a Kashmir watcher yourself. I mean, it really turned militant.
So to Nazir's story, right? So it's a very sad and moving story in a way, but it's a story worth telling, and you tell it in your book about. And he obviously had a deep impact on you, right?
Yes.
What was it about Nazir that moved you so much?
To be very frank, I have met Nazir only once. I mean, when I was because you see, for me, he was another Jackalai soldier.
Correct.
They were Jackalai soldiers. He had Sena medal, true. While I was in service, he had one Sena medal. While I was corps commander, till then he had one Sena medal. There are so many Jackalai soldiers or other soldiers who are Sena medal awardees. So he is one of the brave soldiers. I still remember that after we eliminated Abu Qasim, one of the terrorist leaders of Daesh, after that, I was the corps commander. I went to Visu, that company which took part in the operation, our company. I was introduced to those who took part. He was one of them. And since there were 3 or 4 of these Jackalai boys, my own regiment boys, I had an extra word with them. And that's it. So I met him that time. But during my career, ever since this Territorial Army Battalion Home and Earth was raised, and we'll talk about this later, I really wanted to write about this Territorial Army Battalion. This Territorial Army Battalion is so, or shall I just cover it now in 2 sentences? So, after Ikhwan was wound up in 2003, 2004, when it was wound up, then if Ikhwan was a bold experiment, this was a bolder experiment. And I don't know, arguably this is the only, it's unprecedented in the world.
Tell us the experiment.
Yes. And in fact, the chapter is also called Bolder Experiment.
Yes.
We wound up Ikhwan. We raised an army battalion of these surrendered terrorists. And I take one full chapter to describe how difficult it was to convert these renegades into soldiers, despite the fact that they wanted to help the army, but to convert a rebel to a soldier. I mean, he may be good in fighting, good in generating intelligence, but he doesn't want to get up for PT, he doesn't want to cut his hair, he doesn't want to stick to timings, he doesn't want to stick to, he doesn't want to do drill when there is no requirement and things like that. So it's interesting to see how they were converted. But at a higher level, it was a very good experiment because we got them to take pride in the soldiers. And Nazir's story tells us how he took pride in becoming a soldier. In fact, one of them told me when I was interviewing him, he says, जब हम terrorists मरते थे, उनकी bodies पड़ी रहती थी. The way he said how their bodies were degraded and defiled, I mean, or they were not given the due respect. That's what they felt. And says today, now that we are soldiers, not that they were casualties amongst them. They had, हम तिरंगे में लिपट के आते हैं. So that was something that even I also realized the enormity of it when I interviewed Nazir.
It's an extraordinary story to think of this young Kashmiri man who